don't know if I'm leading this this time.
Yes, you are.
This is the book that when Sandy and I got together, and we're just kind of hashing out that idea, as we said last time, of maybe doing a national press, 1 month, and then maybe a more regional or smaller press the following month. I had just read Chera Hammons' book earlier this year when it first came out, and I just loved it. I loved the cover. I loved the shape of the book. I wrote a blurb for one of her books a while back, and so I'm just already a fan of her work. So I just threw out her name and her book. I thought I would show you first. I don't know if my light is a little too bright here. Let me turn this down. But this particular book is called Amaranthan Hour. It came out from JCAR Press back in 2013 that's how I came to know Chera. She won the chapbook competition from JCAR Press, and I won the full-length book. And so we kind of came into each other's flight path through JCAR Press. And then she went on later to publish a couple of more books, Recycled Explosions, and then The Traveler's Guide to Bomb City. And I recommend these books also. But this one is radically different, I think, than the others. And Sandy and I were talking yesterday. We kind of always get together beforehand to kind of touch base. But there's a kind of plainness in her wording, right? I mean, on one hand, a lot of the poets I read are metrical, alliteration, assonance. There's a lot of sound in their work. I don't necessarily always think of Chera's work as full of a lot of sound, or at least not in that particular way. But there's a kind of plainness to her work, and I don't mean that in a negative way either. There's a crispness and cleanness to the way that her lines come out. And I sometimes wonder, like from stanza to stanza, how did she get there? How did she get from that stanza or those lines to the next lines? Seems to be a lot of white space there. But I think it's one of the things that brings me back to her work. So I just thought I'd begin with a little of that. I know last time with the first book we began with, we also talked about the cover, and Sandy and I were talking about the cover of this book yesterday also. And I just thought we'd open it up that way again. If you have anything to say or questions to raise about the cover of the book or anything along those lines.
The further I read in the book, the more I liked the cover. It's just, to me, it's perfect. The idea I look at the cover and I see blood vessels, I see trees, I see pathways, which are the maps of how injuries occur to me. I really like the cover.
I also saw scars with them.
All of which appear in the book, right? It becomes a really interesting frame or metaphor for what we're going to encounter. I think when I first saw this, and I saw this before it came out, the different cover design possibilities. And, yes, on one hand, I think of rivers, tributaries, small, but also think of veins in the body. As you said, Linda, trees. I mean, all of that is easy to see in this cover and also within the book.
I really liked the cover of it too. The only thing I didn't like, and Jeff, you said you did like it, was the size of it, the shape and size. I do a lot of reading not in my house, and I found it very difficult to. I couldn't read it in the bathtub because it was kind of thing, and I couldn't just tuck it in my purse.
Didn't know that was a normal
I
habit.
like this size. I like this size a lot better because I can tuck it in my pocket and take it with me, and I have it as like a special thing. And so that's the only thing I didn't like about this book was that, and I don't think it was the horizontal, the vertical. It's the horizontal. It was so long to hold, but everything else from the cover to the poems is just phenomenal in this book.
Yeah. But don't you think the cover, though, I mean, to me, it's map-like. It's like
Right.
a shape of a book of maps.
Yeah.
And actually, if you looked at what it said in the credits for the cover, it is rivers. It is the map of the rivers of the United States where this piece came from.
I think the oversized makes you think of a plat. When you pull out big plats of
Right.
maps and deeds, and
Yeah, that's
think-
true.
trigger that kind of.
It does give you the
association.
topo map. Is that what they're called? And then that's like, this is where I want to go. This is the spot, that marks it. So like everything else I loved about it. I mean, I completely get it, and I see that. But yeah, it's lots of really cool things in that.
And I think also, since there's it's mentioned or sort of obliquely, I think, within the book, it's not necessarily front and center, but the idea of Lyme's disease, which Chera has and suffered from, and so that dot makes me think of blood, and the ways in which that disease is part of her life.
Or the bite itself.
Yeah.
Even though it's a pinprick, it looms large eventually.
And it leaves a bullseye rash.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't think I knew that.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, y'all are a smart crowd. This is good.
I did read an interview of hers, and she said the Lyme's disease had caused her memory issues and also shortened her attention span.
Yeah, it's neurological. Yeah.
Yeah.
Main thing.
Anything else about the cover?
It makes me think a little bit of Karen McElmurray's new novel, Wanting Radiance, in which
Oh yeah.
character is a palm reader, fortune teller, and there's that mapped palm on the cover with the center marked, and also a literal map, but also of the palm itself. So it's really parallel to this. Beautifully done.
Well, I'm a fan, as we've said before, about with poems that serve as an epigraph to the book, and so those poems that are set off, and Chera has one here called Amnesties, that is the first poem in the book. I thought if you didn't mind, I would read this just to kind of put it out there. Amnesties on page 11. I am trying again to learn how to live with you, body. This skin is such a map of injury now. So softly have you betrayed us that the borders of discord bleed into each other, smudged riverbanks and muddied water. You granted quarter to enemies, let them sleep in our rooms and eat from the cast iron pans we have spent our whole generation seasoning. How the war horses mill about over biopsied fields where the battle wore scars, and no trees will ever grow there again. That first misunderstanding, body, can you remember where it started? Belly button, birthmark. If I lose sight of you moving through the darkness this time, forgive me. Monuments must not be built for us, body. What we must learn here is not our loneliness. I mean, it seemed to me that this poem had a lot of, seems like a dumb statement. It had a lot of words. It had a lot of words that, that we could enter into, that somehow might cast themselves over the book as a whole, if that makes any sense. Even just down to the title, Amnesties. Well, I mean, I'm throwing this out, but is there a word in this particular poem that resonates, that you feel like, okay, the tentacles of it spread out through the book?
To me, body was one of those words, because she talks about the bodies of humans and animals and trees and one thing and another, and a lot of it is related to the body, how it functions or doesn't function, what it has to adapt to, and the uncertainty of changes. And I've been going through a bunch of stuff right now with my old body, and this poem really spoke to me in that way, about the betrayals of the body that we have no control over. Like, she's had no control over her Lyme disease. But this was one of my favorite poems. I thought it was perfect to start the book. And now that you mention it, it's probably because so many of the words in it do relate to what comes afterwards.
Anybody else?
Well, I think of the word seasoning that she uses in this poem, our whole generation seasoning, in reference to the cast iron pans, but yet there's a type of seasoning that's going on throughout the book, whether you look at the actual seasons or if you look at the impact of the various things that happen with her body or happen to the various characters in the book, the various animals, living and dead. In the book, there's an element of seasoning, I think, to all of it.
Yeah,
I read that line before I read her biography, and when I read that line, I thought, well, she's from the South somewhere. She's the cast iron skillet.
I think also the idea of forgiveness. Where does she say?
Well, she says forgive, I think.
Yes, forgive me, right. I mean,
Yeah.
threatening first husband who was very dangerous. The landscape around her is very unforgiving. The prairie, weather is unforgiving, the drought. The animals that are killed so frequently on the road. So much so much loss, it seems, both in her past and all around her.
And also, I think forgiving her own body for betraying her, and coming to terms and acceptance with that part of her life and how it's played out and how she can deal with it, and still live and write and, have all these beautiful things in her writing. I think it comes from that acceptance, that final acceptance, maybe.
The word that struck me was the last word, loneliness. I felt there was an immense loneliness in this book, even though it was beautiful and full of it was so full of life and interesting things, but I felt like the presence of the speaker was dealing with all these things alone. Even if there was evidence that wasn't the case, there was I don't know, she just seemed very lonely in her, in this journey.
And damaged.
Yeah.
Yeah, Annette, you're mentioning that reminds me of, I made a note on page 65, Googling Borrelia, however you say this. But I noticed within that poem which reminded me of another poem where the idea of soloist
Yeah.
comes up. You know, like playing the music,
Yeah.
and you know, whether a person ends up having a solo, which is a kind of honor, but maybe failing and not really being good enough to have the solo, but then also being now singled out, or there's a kind of solo sense of the being that's been chosen for, you know, this particular disease, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah, I thought that that idea of loneliness resonates with me as I read her work too.
Yeah. And
And
I
I've,
thought
go ahead.
when I read the part about not being chosen for a solo, I thought, well, but you know, you're a poet, so you're playing music all the time, or you're making music all the time, but in a very singular way, not part of an ensemble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was trying to think of something that Chera and I have a kind of conversation exchange that we did that's going to be published next year, and that word loneliness appears in this. I was trying to find this really quickly, maybe bring it up, see what I could find that she had said, but I know she speaks about that, and the ways, of course, in which you know, finding an audience or finding like-minded voices, poets, you know, friends in this kind of world that we live in, which is lonely. But how do we get out of that loneliness? Of course, poetry becomes one of those ways. And I was also, you know, Sandy, something you said reminded me that, and I hadn't remembered it until now, but I was really struck by just the first line of this book. If you just think of that line as a unit of attention, or that line break, that enjambment, right? I am trying again to learn how to live.
Mm.
And then the ways in which that word gets auto-corrected to love, the ways in which love, live, kind of move in and out of each other in a way. I don't know. It's just a thought I'm having. It's not a clear thought, obviously, but
Yeah, I hear you on that, Jeff, and I'm thinking of, if you look at that whole last line, what she's saying, what we must learn here is not our loneliness. And that seems to go back to the idea of I'm trying again to learn how to live.
Mhm.
And this particular poem sets up, a conflict between the I and the body, almost like a body soul thing. But there are a lot of things that are set up as conflicts in almost every poem. The landscape is bleak. A lot of the things that she writes about are bleak. But there's a kind of I don't have the right word for it, but there's something that she comes to in each one of those, and it's not reconciliation, but it is a kind of a balance with where she is, both as a place. I'm thinking a Bible Belt, and as something that's internal. I don't know. Maybe I'm going the wrong way on it, but there's so many wars, and the metaphor that she's using in this poem that runs all the way through it is a war metaphor, from map of injury to borders of discord and betrayal, granted quarter to enemies, warhouses mill about, biopsied fields, goes back to a health thing where the battle wore scars. No trees will ever grow there again. And you think about the bleak landscape of Texas. The first misunderstanding, Body, can you remember where it started? belly button, birthmark, and that almost takes us back to a personal origin, not an origin in disease, but simply the coming into the world. And then this, I don't know, it's like she's saying, teach me how to love the world. Oh, and myself. I'm making it up. Go on.
Sounding good. Well, you know, I hate to use the term umbilical, but that connectedness to the world,
Yeah.
you know, whatever it is. Am I feedbacking? Is this me?
A little bit.
Okay. Is there something I can do? I turn mine down a little bit, maybe. I don't know. But yeah, I think that this idea of trying to learn how to live, which is to learn how to love, you know. Y'all may need to do a little bit more talking here so that I don't I'm in amplification mode. It comes from teaching all day. I'm going to project. You know, I had written down the word battle also. Alice, I know you mentioned this word. And those battles, I think, are everywhere in this book. You know, maybe nowhere more pronounced than the highway, on which, you know, rabbits die, or, you know, and there's the travel that she does, and she sees roadkill, and I don't know if it's the fact that the mentality through which she's already looking, sort of, which would have to be some sort of heightened sense of a battle raging in one's own body, but all of a sudden it's kind of projected onto the landscape, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it seems to me that she sees the things in nature, like in the oak tree. I think it's about the second poem in the book. She sees,
Cross section of an oak.
Cross section of an oak. She sees there's a blemish that started 30 years ago and made the tree grow unevenly most of its life, and then goes down to even our toenails in times of disease or malnourishment, develop ridges that separate normalcy from catastrophe. An uncovered foot can tell all your secrets. And I mean, she does that so often in the book. We'll go from a physical problem and take it into something in nature, whether it's a tree or an animal or whatever. And I think that's one of the ways, it seemed to me that was one of the ways she dealt with her loneliness and her illness, was to look at nature and see where those same things occurred with other living things. Helps you with acceptance, I think, and adjusting to whatever's wrong with you or whatever's wrong with her.
Don't you think, Linda, she almost sees herself as part of nature in this? I was thinking about I think it's the next poem, or fairly close in this section, where she's saying why she'll choose cremation.
Yeah.
And she says, I've stopped wanting as if choosing cremation would let her go back in to being part of nature again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I was struck too by the way, she apparently still likes to work with her horses in spite of the physical problems doing that. Somewhere in here, and I don't remember which section, there's a poem about breaking a colt and how the copper bit winds up having a sweet taste for it. As if it again. It seems
Is that Black Horse, I Am Breaking, page 106? Is that the one?
I think it is.
It just felt.
No, it's page 61, isn't it? Page 61 is called Bridling, and it has the copper train.
It's
sweep.
bridling. Yeah.
Yeah, because
There's two about breaking a horse.
Yeah, there are two.
Yeah, there are two.
The one I was thinking
Yeah.
of was bridling, and it
It is
starts
bridling.
Yeah, bridling.
seething. And at the very end, you know, a bit's not a nice thing to have in your mouth. But it says as soon as it was out, he reached for the bit again as soon as it was out. He'd taken the whole session so well, and the copper inlay, as it was meant to do, had already turned sweet in his mouth. And she has a gift for taking things that are rough and rough to the body and seeing them as something, or making them be something turned sweet. It just, again, it seemed to me to fit what she's doing over and over. The place is bleak, and it really doesn't, you know, she's obviously grown up there, but she's also obviously the last of her line. I don't know. I'll leave it.
Well, you know, Alice, you had, when you'd mentioned bridling, I don't tend to write in my books, but I do make Post-it notes. But on that page, I had, you know, how does experience turn sweet? If I read this particular poem as a kind of metaphor for poetry, even, or a metaphor for how we have to be trained to accept what we're presented, you know, what the context is of our lives, which obviously we don't have control over. We have some measure of control over things, but we also exist within an uncertainty. And there is a kind of, you know, level of danger. Did I switch myself to, sorry. I must have gone offline there for a second. But, and I had no control over that, by the way. But, you know, she maneuvers through this context of danger. If you think about it, all the things that, you know, planes crash and, you know, rabbits are struck and killed on the highway, and there's drought, you know, as that poem Linda brought up, you know, a thin year. I love that, just the kind of images like that she has in her work. You know, there are videos of decomposition. That's on page 22. Horses are put down, and you know, the ending of that one poem where the horse is led down into the grave. Just wow, what an ending to a poem. I mean, it's the kind of poem I would try to read to students who are pretty sure that they hate poetry. I'm like, oh yeah, I think I got a poem. I'm gonna read to you. But you know, water rises. There's, you know, even to have a child is, you know, that's going to suffer. I mean, there are all these things like this. This is the context of the world as she sees it. And even a lot of those things I mentioned, that's just the first section of the book. We're not even into the rest of it yet. So no wonder he's trying to learn how to live, you know.
And one of my favorite poems in this is Staked Plains, because it has this line, with every breath then, let the dangerous world in.
I wrote that down too. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that line so much. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about, Jeff.
Yep.
Even in that poem as well, it says, this sadness, you unreel a bit more of yourself each time you listen for it. And it's that unreeling of yourself and allowing yourself to experience it, whatever the world holds, wherever it's the rabbits being, you know, run over, or this illness that she has to face. Experiencing it. Yes, you have it there.
I have it on the Post-it note.
In the dangerous world, and letting it in and feeling it. I think that's what's so beautiful about this book, that there's so much opening and exposing, and here it is, and let's all feel it together. You know, especially that poem, that the capacity for malignancy. Okay, y'all, that poem absolutely killed me. I read the end of that. I really put the book down and I said, I can't do this anymore right now. I mean, that book, of course, my personal experience is right in that poem, but that poem is a just incredible poem because of it. It's allowing us to see these things and to feel these things.
You know, it's hard to pick a poem from this book that is maybe the standout. You know, I think we said this last time. I mean, you know, Maggie Vaughn always said, "Honey, find out what poem it is in your book that'll sell it and read it." And those of you who know Maggie know that story. But in this book, I'm really hard pressed. Every time I read it, I find a different poem that I think, no, this is the one. This is my favorite poem. I don't know. I mean, do you have which one would you pick?
I couldn't pick one. I tried because I thought possibly Sandy was going to ask us to name our favorite poem like she did last time.
I mean, we should.
Every one of these poems have something in it that make it my favorite, you know.
I have a favorite section. The bone section really spoke to me. I mean, I have so many lines underlined in all of those poems, and I guess since bone is my favorite section, my favorite poem from that section would probably be my favorite poem of the book, and it's the poem for the body found nearby on page 33. And there are just so many lines that just reach out and grab you. We are passing ghosts. We want to know you mattered. So many people think you might belong to them, that they arrive one by one, that no one asked them to come. Someone will always teach us what loss is like. Someone will always teach us how to grieve. A body can hide in this ochre plain, soft and still for months while its stories unravel. If someone asks you, am I a good person? Say yes. No one will ask it twice. You fumble in the dusk where it is hard to see each other. It's like, wow, that's just like this life that we're all walking through right there on the page. And it's just, oh my gosh, it's so compelling.
That's one of my favorites too.
I agree. I really like that one. And I like that whole section a lot.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that I can't pick a favorite poem, but one thing I want to say is she has so many amazing opening lines. Like, she pulled me into so many poems where maybe I looked at the title and went, oh, I don't know. But then the first line, and it was like, oh yeah, oh yeah. She closes them out well too. I would like her to teach a workshop on opening and closing lines, but particularly opening lines.
Yes.
I thought she was masterful.
A favorite of mine is real close to that one about finding the body, and it's Broke, another horse poem where the floodwaters are coming up and the people are watching the horses struggle, and then then they finally go in to save them. It's like, oh my God, the horses are going to drown. You know, I can't read this.
I know.
It's just so beautiful. As you say, it's so compelling.
I was so glad those horses made it. I just didn't think I didn't expect that. I thought they were not going to make it.
I totally expected that too. With all the other poems in there, I thought, I cannot keep reading this, but I had to read it. And I thought, I'm going to cry, I'm going to sob at the end of this. And I was sobbing because I was so relieved.
Linda, what's the title of that poem? It's not in the section Bones?
No, it is. It's called Broke. It's on page 24.
24, okay. I'm past it, okay.
Yeah. And that has a great first line. As the water rises, the horses lighten.
Yeah.
Wow.
What I think is interesting about this book is that, poems are written individually. It's not every book of poems that comes together so incredibly well like this one does, where all the themes and the mythology kind of the desert and the dryness, and it just weaves, different kinds of illness just weave all through it. And it's sort of a miracle if you think everything was written individually.
Yeah.
And also the language in the book was all plain words.
Yes.
It wasn't as elaborate as last month's choice.
Right.
But they came to a deeper truth in very simple language.
It's very concrete imagery. It's not abstract. It's very concrete, specific descriptions.
Sometimes it made me think about Wendell Berry, because his poetry, I think he's a beautiful prose writer, and I've often been surprised at how plain spoken his poems are, that they aren't very dressed up at all. And they're eloquent, but really understated. So I thought about him every now and then when I was reading her lines. I don't think their sensibilities are the same, but just the plain spokenness and depth.
Going back to Broke, I had marked some things in it too because I liked it. She talks about in the third stanza, the bay which someone trained to lead when it was days old, by releasing the hold once it stepped forward, when it learned to give in until it would follow anyone. And then over first line on the next page, she says, let us not so easily turn away from what we have bound. Yes. And she makes so many juxtapositions like that, which talk about the way humans interact, it seemed to me. And she will do that in the midst of telling you about something else, because this is about the horses drowning. But anyway, I like those lines in that poem.
I think Sharon was the one who was talking just before this about the plain spokenness. And I find it so incredibly strange that, we want people to read our poems. And so we need to write in a way that draws them in. Yet if we tend to write like what I think this is wonderfully available to anybody who would open it up. On the one hand, you have some of the elites, the poetry elites, who would look at this and say it's too ordinary in the language. And I think they would miss some of the elegance of the imagery that she draws from her plain spokenness. But by the same token, I also know that people will pick this up, like regular people who don't normally read poetry would pick it up and say, well, it's not poetry because it doesn't follow a specific pattern of any kind. And so I feel I'm torn when I read poems like this, because these are the people that I want to succeed. These are the people that I want their poetry to be out in the world so that everybody can get them. And yet I feel like that on both extremes, you've got neither the really elite poetry people nor the people who I don't know what to call them, just the people who don't normally read it, who think that poetry belongs in this kind of a box. They're not going to pick these up, and it hurts my heart that so many people will miss this wonderful writing. A lot of people didn't like that Ted Kooser was poet laureate because his writing was, too ordinary, I guess, was one of the terms I've heard used for his writing. But how many people have been able to pick it up and go, oh, wow, yeah, I get that. That's what I think poetry should be. And that's one of the things I really appreciate about this writer, Chera Hammons. It's just fab. You just walk right into it. Like you guys were saying about the first line, you have to read it. You have to keep reading. And that's what's so important about, something important to remember as a writer, to draw in the reader who might not necessarily keep reading.
I was thinking about the language as well. Sometimes editors will say it's prosy. And I think that may be that she's conscious of that, and that's why she chooses the couplet form so often.
Exactly. I was
Because
thinking that too.
that makes it look more traditional. And the shape of the book, embraces that long line couplet form. She's able to embrace the longer prose line, but yet, she's still got that couplet going. So, you're able to see the shape of the poem better.
Yeah, I thought that was a distinct.
Artificially enjam that line by doing an artificial line break.
I've not seen anybody else do that. Like the poem Evergreen, where it's really a prose poem, but she's divided it in couplets. And how we were talking last month about if some of us were saying if a poem's really long, we just don't want to go there. And if she had taken Evergreen and broken up the lines like a traditional poem, it'd have been a 2-page poem, and we wouldn't have maybe been invited in as much.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, there are some poems in the book when she doesn't use the couplets, and I'm looking at her stanzas and some of her line breaks, and I go, oh, I don't know about that line break. I don't know about, why does she do 2 lines here and 3 lines there and then 4 lines here in the stanzas, when maybe she could have cleaned it up a little more, because it reads well, but I'm wondering about the structure in some of the poems. So did anybody pick up on any of that where she wasn't using the couplet form?
Well, related to that, in the poem Staked Plains that Sandy mentioned earlier, I noticed that every stanza ended with a period. So I thought, okay, so she's got as many lines as it takes to get to the next period in this poem. But I kept reading. I was running behind, so I didn't have time to sit and ponder how I thought that related to the meaning that she was trying to express, because she doesn't always do that. She doesn't always end each stanza with a period in that way. So that's just, maybe you can tell me. I don't know. But I didn't have time to ponder it because I was running behind. So
I was reading Lagenbach about this same time. He has a little short book on line breaks. And I was
James Lagenbach.
Yeah. I was reading it about the same time that I was reading The Descent of the Germanwings. And what he's talking about is the way that breaking up your lines can create tension, which is particularly needed in free verse, because you don't have the metrics to play against each other as tension. And this one was interesting because the first syntactical unit that you get is 4 lines long and goes over the 2 couplets. And then you get a couplet that really is 1 syntactical unit. The next couplet does 1 and 1 and 1 and 1 after that, and 1, and then you start lapping just a little bit, where photograph is jammed into the beginning of the next couplet. So you're back to 2, and then 1 and 3. Maybe even and then 2 more after that. But she ends on this 1, 1, 1 as far as the lines and the syntax, where she started out with this thing that ran through line after line after line. And I thought that she was doing some of the things I was reading about. He also talked a lot about how lines break. He was saying you could have something that's in-stopped, or you could have a break that works with the syntax. It's where your voice would normally hesitate for just a minute. The way a comma makes you hesitate, or the way of an inset parenthetical phrase could make you hesitate. And then there's the other one where you've got the kind of thing, and she does this in a lot of her poems, where you've got the baby's cry hanging in the air, caught as in a photograph, and then with the same strange stillness as a horse caught mid-stride. Or the fragments of bodies gathered and lifted out of where they fell. And that's not where you expect a break. If you were just reading it in prose, you'd say lifted out of where they fell before you stop. I think she's really conscious of the musicality that way. I don't know.
You know, you think about, I mean, to me, we got a room full of poets here, but it seems as though there are 3 basic reasons for why people would break lines. It's a unit of measure, or it's a unit of syntax, or it's a unit of attention. And like the book begins with a line, which is, I would say, a unit of attention. I am trying again to learn how to live. So we see that first, don't we? We see that particular line first. Now, of course, it goes on to with you, body, but as a unit of attention, we only see that line. And I feel like that's partly the way in which she conceives of lines, but I think she's also, to some degree, an aphorist.
Yeah.
You know, like on page 30, no matter where we go, we walk on bones. I mean, well, there's an epigraph for a book. This is our history. We started with nothing. Then our ancestors learned how to dig. I mean, to me, that's just beautiful. Turn instead to catch the shadows. That's where the interest lives. I mean, these are like, to me, wisdom type statements. They're aphoristic statements. And, you know, on page 51, everything here holds so hard to whatever it can. I mean, these are, I think part of her mind works at that level, so that gives room for these particular kind of stanza structures, where here's the thought, and the thought takes place within that stanza, whether that's 2 lines or 3 lines or 4 lines. And then the next one may not be the same length, you know.
It's interesting to think about her writing about death a lot. And this is before the virus hit. You know, you think how many books of poetry are going to come out about that.
And I was looking at, I know this poem's been mentioned, but The Descent of the German Wings. I think in one iteration of reading this book, this was my go-to poem. And I liked the kind of interplay between music and silence that is part of this poem. And then also the way she does images, and maybe also what Alice is kind of hinting at or getting at, this sort of interplay between lengths of thought that obviously creates conflict or tension, or some level of tension at the level of the language, where if you have 2 or 3 lines worth of a stanza, and then we have short syncopated statements in a row that follow. I mean, I think about the ending of this poem where she says, this plane has crashed right in the Alps, the metal glittering sharp as ice around the flanks of the Alps. The fragments of bodies gathered and lifted out of where they fell, as gently held as early asters. And those little moments like that in her work are really fascinating, as gently held as early asters. There's a lot of small, what I would say are phrases that are thrown in the midst of something larger, but it's like, whoa, that's really, I'd like to stay with that for a while. Mm-hmm. Such a beautiful image. Or love letters smuggled through a war. If I were a musician, I could write it another way too. Now at the top of page 60, I could unroll the lines of the staff like a fence. The notes would settle all over it like wrens. Then they would sing if they felt a song there.
I love that.
Yeah, that's I see like distaffs and like sheet music or something, the way that she sees that on the landscape. It's just so beautiful.
Did anybody besides me see barbed wire? Or is that just my country girl coming out?
Maybe.
No, I was seeing staffs of music.
In those old shape notes ones, those shape note ones kind of look like the barbed wire, I think.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
I saw wire. I'm not sure it was barbed, but the unrolling made me think of wire.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, what else do you want to touch upon? We've touched upon several things here.
I'd like to ask about the order of the poems in the book. We were talking about favorite poems or best poems. And if you think you've got, your top tier poems or your superstar poems, how do you know where to place them throughout your manuscript for pacing versus your quiet poems? So I'm wondering how she did that. She's got these sections. I flipped through it several times. I don't know. I can't figure out how she decided on her sections. She's got all these horse poems. Should she have put her horse poems together or spaced them apart?
Yeah, and I counted them. I counted poems that mention horses just because I was super curious. It kept, popping up over and over again. There are about half the poems in this book have an image of a horse in it, either about the horse itself, like a poem that's, that as the main theme, or mentions it in some way as an image or a recurring character almost.
So what does it? So what does that say? She has half a book about horses, or a chapbook about horses. You know what I'm saying? So how do you work in so many about?
What would you think is her strongest poem? Out of curiosity.
Let me see. What did I put stars by?
And are they sprinkled throughout, or are they in one particular section?
Toward the front and toward the back. Yeah. So Black Horse I Am Breaking is toward the back. And I thought the autocorrect poem was super cute.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that her strongest poem? I just thought it was cute. And I really resonated with the Wedlock poem, and that's toward the back. So the one's toward the back. You want to close with a bam. So I thought she did do that.
Yeah. And we talked a lot about how are these sections working, and how do the poems fit into those sections. And for a while, I couldn't really find like skin and limb. I mean,
yeah, I was looking.
But what is the connection between them that allow them to be in that section?
Yeah, I was looking too.
And then the section of bones, to me, fits so much more clearly. If you look at some of the language in there, sprinkled throughout the entire, I mean, all of these poems, we walk on bones, catalog the bones, stacks of skulls, pelvic bone of a deer, lingering over bones, bone pain, splintering bones, ribs. So that keeps coming up over and over in this section, but not so much in the first section.
Yeah.
And not so much for me in the section after that, eye, ear, throat, and mouth. I could find some connections, but not really tons. And then the final section, stomach, heart, stomach, there's a lot of love, so that kind of fits that. But I don't know. I don't think she's putting all of her strong poems in one particular section at the beginning, or I don't know. They're kind of sprinkled throughout, I think, for me.
Yeah. I'm never really sure. I mean, I know we always kind of talk about these things, but if you have 16 people or 12 people or 28 people in a room, almost no one agrees with what the strongest poem is in any book. And I love, I think Beth, you said something about the quiet poems. They're like places to rest sometimes after longer poems. And one of the ones for me, of course, I like Bridling or Hook Echo, but there was another one that was earlier in the book, just as a small poem. And the more I come back, it's actually a little bit later. It's on page 100, Why the Birds Return.
Okay, hey y'all, Chera is here.
Okay.
So I'm gonna let her in.
All right.
Sorry, Jeff.
Go ahead. No, I was just gonna say that particular poem is a small poem compared to the others, at least on the page, but it's one I keep coming back to. Hey, Chera.
Hi.
And I'm just always thankful for those particular, they're like little secrets in a book. Like, oh yeah, everybody's gonna be paying attention to this poem over here because they think that's the one. And they're like, this one's my little secret. I'm not gonna tell anybody about this poem, and I'm gonna read it like 1,012 times in a year. And that actually sounds like an exaggeration on my part, but of course it's not. But yeah, Chera is here popping in, and so we were kind of, hey, we just are at a standstill and discussing this book. We don't know where to go next, so it's good that you came in. You can take us someplace new. Well, does anybody have a question?
Let's ask. I would love to ask Chera. First of all, we love this book so much.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes, we do.
That's so kind of you.
Beautiful, beautiful work.
Thank you.
We were talking about the placing of the poems in the sections.
Uh-huh.
So actually, two things I'd love for you to comment on. One, about the structure of the individual poems, how a lot of them are written in couplets. and then some of them seem to be written in like random, maybe like 4 lines in a stanza, and then 3, and then 6, or then whatever. So maybe if you could talk about a little bit about the structure of the poems, and then about how you place these poems in the sections and what they mean to you, those different sections. Of course, they're body parts, body sections, but we'd love to hear your take on that.
As far as the structure of the poems, I liked the couplets because it felt like the space that was in my head. So I don't know if you guys know that I have cognitive dysfunction pretty badly, and it's like even worse right now at night. It gets really bad starting at like 3 o'clock. It takes a dive. So if I say anything that doesn't make sense, please tell me. So I preferred couplets where I could, where it worked for the poem, because I liked that space. Like, to me, it was kind of like the synapses in my brain kind of jumping. If it didn't work for the poem, like if it just fragmented it too much, then I just broke it where it made sense to me before the idea changed. And does that answer your first question?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, awesome. And as far as the arrangement of the book, I looked for common elements. Some of it's word I'm looking for. What is the word for that? Consequential. No, is that the word?
We'll take it.
Okay, you're getting my 8 o'clock brain. So some of them were in order of time, like how they happened. I wanted it to be
chronological.
Yes, thank you. God bless you. Chronological. I knew it started with a C. Yeah, so I wanted it to be like you are getting you're getting the testing to find the diagnosis, and then you get the diagnosis, and then you have to live with it and what it means for your life and the things like you feel like you're losing. So that was the overall arc I wanted in there. And I wanted to not end on a depressing note, but on an accepting note. Section I wanted to make one mostly of acceptance. Part of it did have to do with, I know it's like bone and stuff like that, so part of it did have to do with the stuff that was in the poems, and if it worked that way with the overall arc that I had in mind, then that's where I put the poem. If it didn't, then I didn't worry about it that much, as long as it worked for the feeling that I wanted to get in the book. That makes sense.
Yes. That's so interesting, because the bone section was the one that really made sense as the poems that were in that particular section. You know, there was so much that was bone oriented, you know, that had phrases of that in there. Yeah, so
good.
Really interesting. Anybody else have a question you'd like to ask Chera?
Chera, when you were putting the manuscript together, did you have poems that you decided just didn't make the cut? Did you try out different kinds of
always.
things?
I feel like always when you put a poetry manuscript together, you're going to have to find the ones like, even if you really like them, if they don't fit with what it is you're trying to accomplish, just save them for another manuscript. It doesn't mean you have to lose them forever. Just save them for a place where they fit. And I actually had a discussion with the editors at the current events kind of poems, because like the German Wings one, they said these don't fit and you need to remove them. I had to tell them why they were there, and it was because whenever you're very isolated and your world is very small, and so I was living in this very small world, just taking it a day at a time, and then stuff like that would happen. Suddenly it would jar me into the bigger world again. So that was an important experience that I felt should be in the book, as I was mimicking my experience with illness. So once I explained that to them, they were okay with it.
Had you submitted this manuscript to previous publishers, or was that the first?
Oh, the first one never takes it. That happening. It might happen for some people, definitely not for me, or probably for Jeff from our conversations. I feel like this was maybe the 13th or 14th place I sent it. And it underwent several revisions, of course, between submitting it. But I didn't book before this. I think I sent it to 30 places, so 13 was pretty good.
One of the things we had talked about was quiet poems. And in the middle of your book on page 53, and then the next poem starting on 55, you kind of go back to your youth in two different poems. And I was curious about that particular movement into those two poems and then back out from them.
Yeah, part of it was wanting to capture, I guess, how you're kind of subject to the world you live in a way. I wouldn't say a victim, but you have to rely on people sometimes for your perception, even if it's not right. So I was delving into that with those two poems, especially coming after for the youth group one, where they're seeing smoke on the radar and thinking that it's rain, but that wasn't the correct perception. So that's why I put those where I did. Does that answer your question? I know, Jeff, we've talked about how my poems are quiet before, and sometimes they might be too quiet. Like I don't think editors sometimes take the time to see the nuance in them, but probably a lot of poets can say that.
Well, I had when I told the group that I don't really mark up my books, I always have Post-it notes, but I have a Post-it note on page 55 for that chair test poem. And, the lines that really kind of leapt off the page for me were when the most important distinction was first clarinet, which might be a distinction in youth, but there's a lot more in this book where even an idea like that, where the most important distinction gets infinitely more complicated as you age. And so, I might read a poem like this, or someone might read this poem and think, well, how does this really resonate or connect with the book? Well, if you see it in connection to something else or something else in the book, all of a sudden this moment seems necessary to the book. That line seems necessary to this book. And even later, what's the line about, on page 69 with standard time, I love this, when you say, what is home? The years shift around it. I mean, that's like a haiku. I get chills just
Thank you.
With that. It's like a question and an answer, but the first question is so simple. I mean, we've all asked this, like, what is home? But that answer that follows, the years shift around it. I don't see how you come up with that. That's, and I don't know where to go with it either, except it throws me back to the rings in the oak tree at the beginning of the book. And how some.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, I was just thinking that's in terms of like sometimes it's a thin year and other times, and that's like what life is.
And a lot of times we don't get to pick where home is. It's kind of a result of circumstance. So that line to me refers to where I live here in Texas, which I have a love-hate relationship with, especially right now. But also, I was mostly homebound when I was writing this, and so it felt a lot like I was just standing at my window looking out and watching the world go by, like I was in the same place and everything else was moving. So those are the personal meanings that went into that line.
We have decided that you need to offer a workshop for people for beginning and ending lines.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
We love how your poems just draw us in. I mean, even when I was tired or I thought, well, I want to just focus on this poem that I just read, but then I would accidentally look at the first line of the next poem, and then I had to read it because it just draws us in. And so we talked about how we've decided you should give a workshop on
Oh, okay. Well, I'll let you know. Thank you so much.
Yes,
I'm
let
so
the
glad
whole
to hear
group
that.
know, please.
I'd be interested in if for you as the writer, how you feel like your work might have changed from before your illness to after your illness.
Oh, that's a big question, and it's a really good one. I think if you sat down with my early books, starting with my chapbook, and which is when I met Jeff, we both won a contest in the same year. So if you started with my chapbook, which I wrote between the ages of 18 and 20, it's a lot different. It's, I think, and also more abstract. And I think it had a clearer, more obvious direction. There was actually a period with the brain stuff that I have of about 6 months where I couldn't write a poem at all. And it was like switches were always going off in my head. So for a while, a long time actually, I couldn't read. I forgot how to read, and the words just looked like squiggles on the page. And it was terrifying because as a writer, like that's what you do. That's what you have to do. So whenever the poetry switch went off, I didn't know what to do, and I was really scared. And finally, because I didn't know who I was if I couldn't do that, I figured out a way, and it literally felt like making new pathways through my mind. Like I would pick up an object and study it, a physical object, like say an apple, and think about how it made me feel, and then think about why I felt that way about it, and then think about another image that might also make me feel that way. And I started learning to make connections again that way. So my work now takes these leaps that the old work doesn't, and it's because my brain has had to learn to fire a different way, and I had to kind of force it to learn that.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I'm not like sad or glad about that happening. It's just the way it is.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question.
And we mentioned that the exact thing, Chera, about the leaps that some of these within some of these poems and how interesting that was. So it's really even more interesting to hear you kind of explain how that occurred. I mean, it works beautifully.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Well,
Creating a
hope else ever. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I hope if anybody else ever has a similar issue, maybe I can help them get through it because I did it too.
Do you think one of the central figures in the poem is the horses? In fact, just so you know, Chera, Sandy counted, and there are 24 poems that mention horses.
Might be a little obsessed.
Yeah, but I thought I was kind of struck by how the horse. I mean, even the breaking of a horse, broke. That word, it's the title of a poem. Broken. The self has broken, the identity somehow broken, and the ways in which we have to be trained. You talk about that toward the very end. So, I know you work with horses, but the horses in this book are really, they figure heavily, I think. Obviously they do. I'm very touched by the fossil, that particular fossil of a horse. It's like how does it end up at the bottom of this lake? It's this mystery, right?
Yeah.
But it's also kind of a bedrock upon which so much is built, I think, and maybe even rebuilding. Am I saying anything that makes sense?
Yes, you are.
Well, this is a shock to me.
There are a lot of layers in this book that I'm afraid to really delve into myself too much because it was such a difficult time, not knowing what I would come out of this period of my life with.
Well, you do say that the horses do everything they can to keep from lingering over bones,
Mm-hmm.
and I wonder if that has anything to do with the voice of the poet as well.
Yeah. I feel like the speaker was trying to, it was me, of course. Like, I'm the speaker of my poems, it's pretty obvious. Trying to figure out how to hold on to the things that felt like they were slipping away. Like, I used to ride my horse once a week, and now I'm lucky if I can ride once every 3 months. But that doesn't mean I can't have horses in my life still, right? Like, so sometimes it has to be enough to go out and brush them, and that's okay. That's okay. So a lot of it was coming to peace with stuff like that.
It's still a kind of tending, brushing the horse, cleaning out the hooves. You're still
Mhm.
tending to your animal.
Yeah, and you still, like, as soon as I smell horse, I feel my heart rate drop, and I'm like, oh, okay, it's okay here. This is my safe place.
Oh,
Can I ask you about, and if you don't want to talk about this, you don't have to, but so you've published books before this, but you don't have a publisher where you knew if you sent your book, they would publish it. And so, is that correct?
I do. I feel like this to have published me before would publish me again.
Okay.
However, I have a weird amount of ambition, and I try to find a bigger press every time. And part of that is wanting to make more connections. Like, that's one of the main ways that you as a writer make connections. So I published the chapbook with Jakar in North Carolina. And then I had poetry connections, but they were all on the East Coast. The next book I published was Recycled Explosions, and that was kind of like I sent work somewhere and they said, do you have a manuscript? And I was like, yes, Jeff has it. I was like, I can in a couple of weeks. So I went ahead and did that. And I did that with a Texas press so that I would have connections in my home state. So it's been very strategic, I guess, where I've published. But now the ones I'm eyeing are the ones that seem impossible.
Well, what I was wondering is if it was difficult knowing that you were now writing a different kind of poetry, that the whole experience and process was different and the aesthetic therefore was different.
Yeah.
I was wondering about mustering the courage to send a whole different kind of thing out into the world when that's, not what your foundation had been. And so how did you do that? Do you just have readers who encouraged you? They read your book and they encouraged you, people like Jeff, or how did, I'm just intrigued by that because that must have been, everything about it was jarring for you.
It was. I'm at the point with poetry anyway, where if I don't write press, I'd rather not publish it at all. Not sure why I'm at that point. Traveler's Guide, the book before, it was important to me. I with a lesser press who solicited the manuscript because I thought I was dying and I didn't know why. I was misdiagnosed or undiagnosed at the time, misdiagnosed with depression. So that one was important to have a lot of say in the process. So I went with a lesser press that would let me do that and all of the timeline. And I haven't really sent anything press that I published for, partly for that reason. It makes me really nervous. Like, if they reject me this, or if a stranger rejects me, not as big a deal. So I haven't really approached presses a second time. And I've actually been trying to find, it's kind of interesting that you asked that, because I just finished a poetry manuscript that I'm now trying to place. And I know that it's different, and I'm not sure what kind of reader is going to get it. But that's the way my brain works now. I don't know that I have another option. So I've been trying to find presses that are friendly to people with chronic illness or mental illness even, just because I feel like they'd be more receptive to something that's not the norm, that maybe has the appearance of the norm but is not the norm. Like I feel like my work has started to become.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Anybody else have a question or comment?
It's a treat to have the poet herself here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's really nice to talk to people who have read my book.
Well, Sarah, this is probably more information than the rest of the group needs, but I want you to know that how much your book meant to me. I have suffered with fibromyalgia most of my adult life, so I know about the mind going away at 3 o'clock and things like that. And I have been dealing with trying to calm chronic pain most of this year.
I'm so sorry.
Your book came at exactly the time I needed it, and it left me feeling very, very hopeful, and that I can accept however life goes at this point in time. And I thank you for that. It's been a delight to have you here to talk with us about it.
Oh, you're gonna make me cry. I mean that's why we go through this, to publish. It's to reach the people who need it. And that's a lot of what I was thinking with this book, was that there are other people out there like me, and I don't want them to feel so isolated by their illness.
Well, you say in the last line of your first poem, what we must learn here is not our loneliness. So I thought you were saying in that first poem is that you write poetry and we read poetry to connect.
Yes.
To not be so lonely.
And there is I just found a book about Boat Press. If you're interested, it's called Tender Points. So I've just gotten it. I haven't started it yet, but it sounds amazing. So you might look into that. Tender Points.
Tender Points?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and it's specifically about fibromyalgia.
Oh, okay. And you said complete?
It's at Nightboat Press, Tender Points.
Oh, Tender Point. Oh, yes. I will look into that.
Yeah, good.
Well, Chera, you know I'm a big fan. Have been for years. But
I'm a fan too, Jeff.
I mean, I never want to sound like a complete raving idiot, but I think writing poems is like about the best thing that anybody can do. And I just love the idea of like lines in poems kind of becoming like these talismans, or like these small prayers or whatever that we say to ourselves on from day to day. And what I've loved about your work throughout the years is that I can pick up a book and not even read a poem, just kind of like, put my finger down somewhere and come on a line that's like, yeah, I'll be thinking about this for the rest of the day. It just seems so.
Thank you, Jeff.
On my Post-it note right in front of me, I'll probably tweet this out, right? Yes. No, you too know what it is like to wander in emptiness, looking for artifacts. And this book is filled with stuff like that.
Well, that means a lot to me coming from you. Thank you. That line was actually from my friend, the archaeologist, who was across the hall from me when I taught at Clarendon College.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, we talked about archaeology a lot.
yeah. Well, that's interesting because it is a, I think about the way in which you lead the horse down into the grave and then you put him down, and so that, and then somebody else will. It's almost as though there are places in the book where you're aware of the fossil of the horse in one poem, but then in another poem, hey, there's a future somewhere on down the road that when someone finds this, they will know that he was loved. And there's this kind of well, what was the word in the kind of beginning? Generation seasoning or something, and this awareness of the sort of passage of time that's on this large scale that we're the small part within the middle of. Yeah.
I
I'm glad you found the artifacts. So
appreciate your thoughtful observations. Jeff is my best poetry friend. Like I would be here in the Texas Panhandle without my friend Jeff.
Jeff, what poem was that line in?
let's see. I think is it the poem for the body? Is this right? Found nearby. Is this where I got this?
Do you mean the seasoning one or
the archaeology?
Well, the lines I quoted, "Turn to catch the shadows." That's where the interest lies. That's in the poem for the body found nearby, and then that has that line about you two know what it's like to wander in emptiness, looking for artifacts. But the poem where the horse is brought down is the capacity for malignancy is ancient. That Sandy talked about. The ending of that. I mean, we have to read this. Well, no, I started to read it. I have the poet here. What am I talking about? But
do you feel like reading it, Chera?
Sure. Which did you want the capacity for malignancy? That one?
Yeah.
Or a different one?
Yeah.
That one.
Okay. Let me find it real quick.
It's on 29.
Thank you. I would know this by now. Okay. See, I have like a ton of things marking it, and it doesn't. The capacity is ancient. The woman on the gallery floor says yes when I ask if I can photograph the fossil of Proterohippus venticulum that has the dawn of horses. It's actually the only replica we have in the store, she says, and shows me photographs of the original, which has the same black horse shape, black nestled among prehistoric fish in the sandy rock. His tail is missing, she says, but it might just be under the fish. How the ancestor of horses ended up on a lake bottom is a mystery as complex as ours. On Facebook, my friend posts the announcement that at least there existed in humans nearly 2 million years ago, that the bone of a foot has been discovered with the same cells as those that make us sick. This way we can confirm that death doesn't need to evolve. I still remember the spiral of tissue from the breast biopsy floating in the fluid in the little jar, how I couldn't lift a gallon of milk or I'd start to bleed. That belonged to my maternal grandmother, who died and took her care when she was 24. We wear fragile bodies, and now it would seem they have always known how to against us, though there are so many other kinds of endings we could find. No matter where we go, we walk on bones. The gallery is air-conditioned and clinical, and its most stunning fossil is the only one that's a replica, a horse that is dog-sized and has toes instead of hooves. The way it lies on its side reminds me of the horse I had to euthanize because of tumors. The man with the backhoe dug a ramp into a grave. I led the horse to the bottom, and the vet let him down in stages. We watched him die to make sure he wouldn't know that he was being buried. There used to be a mound over him, but now there's nothing. I left his halter on so that whoever finds him will understand that he was loved.
Oh, that last line.
Love that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, Chera, I actually read this poem. I was in my first run through of the book. I read this poem and I had to close it and put the book down. It's okay, I can't do any more.
Too heavy.
No more for me.
Yes.
Okay. That
Yeah.
poem is definitely my favorite in this
Oh,
book.
thank you.
And the ending is just incredibly powerful and
Thank
beautiful
you.
and heartbreaking.
Incredibly beautiful.
I had to practice reading that quite a bit before I could do it without too much emotion.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's a good place to end, unless somebody had something else. Right.
Chera, thank you so much.
Thank you.
so much.
It was a real pleasure. And if any of you think of anything or want to contact me for any reason, feel free. You can, Jeff has my email, or you can Google me.
Yeah.
I'm on the Google.
All right.
Thank you so
All
much
That
for
was
having me.
great.
Thank
Thanks
you.
to everyone
Chera.
for making this happen. It's been a pleasure.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll remind everybody that our next meeting is November 17th, and we're going to read David Kirby's book, More Than This.
Yep.
That's coming up.
All right.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
All
you.
right. See you.
Good night,
Thank
good night,
y'all.
Bye,
everybody.
everybody.
Night.
Bye, Chera.
Really enjoyed it,
Bye.
guys. Thank you.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.